Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good night, whatever it is, wherever you are. I am absolutely delighted to welcome all of you to a new episode of New Horizons in Engaged Buddhism. Today, we have someone that I have not really known for a long time and don't know personally, but I have been reading a lot on what she does, and I'm very impressed and very excited to be able to bring her on the show so she can talk to us about the very interesting work that she has been doing for years and the kind of work that many of us are working with in our own communities. Mushim Patricia Ikeda is a mindfulness and Buddhist teacher, justice activist, author, diversity, equity, inclusion consultant, poet, and mother. She comes from a Zen Buddhist tradition where she once was telling me she took these renunciant lay monastic vows. That sounds really extreme. Um, and she is the core teacher of the East Bay Meditation Center that we're going to hear a lot about. And it's a place that is known for its radical inclusivity. And Mushim's article, I Vow Not to Burn Out, it was written for mindful activists and it went viral. It was published in Lion's Roar. And it actually had a quote that I found would be a really good way for us to begin, which is Samsara is burning down all of our houses. We need a path of radical transformation. And there's no question in my mind that the Bodhisattva path is it. So, welcome, Mushin, and let's begin by having you lead us on a short meditation, and then we will go on into the interview. Welcome, Mushin.
Thank you so very much, and thank you, Sangha. If you'd like, let's begin with simply taking 3 mindful breaths together. For some people, awareness of the breath might be uncomfortable, in which case you don't need to do it. And we do have some hand and arm movements that go along with it, which I learned from my spiritual brother, John W. Ellis IV, Master John Ellis of the Ananda Martial Arts and Fitness Academy here in Oakland, California, in the United States. So if you like, I'm starting with at my waist, but since you can't see it, pretend this is my waist. Put the hands palms up if you like. Okay, so, and as we're breathing in, we're lifting this up through the entire torso, up to the top of the head. And then as we breathe out, lightly pressing down as though there are columns of air underneath each hand. This is kind of lightly pressing down. All right, here we go. So hands, palms up near the waist, breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Third time, breathing in, breathing out. Now allowing the breath to become normal, whatever that is for you, and resting a moment in whatever your present moment experience is. And I'll invite the bell of mindfulness gently 3 times. Thank you for your practice.
Thank you, Mushim, for bringing us all to the same place. Um, Before we launch into talking about the East Bay Center, let's talk a little bit about you. Let's talk a little bit about your life and your process and being an Asian American and being a Buddhist. And you were the person that should suggest that I interview Sharon Su, Dr. Sharon Su. And that was extraordinary. It was a very interesting interview where we really talked about it's kind of like when Americans teach tango, and then you bring an Argentinian and they're going, but I am an Argentinian, okay? That this is what I did when I was 2 years old. My grandmother does it. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and your path.
Thank you very much. I was born in 1954 in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States. That's right in the American Midwest. And I'm a third generation Japanese American. The word for that is sansei. San means three, so third generation. And Japanese Americans count generations as Asian Americans by the first generation. The Issei are the immigrants. So that's all four of my grandparents came from Japan. My parents were Nisei. They were American citizens born in the United States. The second generation, I am the third generation Sansei, and my son is Yonsei, or fourth generation. And I do come from a Buddhist family on my mom's side in Hawaii. My maternal grandfather was a Soto Zen Buddhist practitioner, and they had a mixed marriage because my grandma, his wife, was a Jodo Shinshu, a Shin Buddhist. And they began raising their children, my mom and her siblings, as Buddhists. However, everything was cut short when World War II, Pearl Harbor, the attack on Pearl Harbor happened. All of the Buddhist temples, their Japanese language school were closed down. Some of the Buddhist priests in Hawaii were arrested. I think they all were arrested, some of them in their robes. They didn't even have time to bring along a spare change of clothing. And so for my mother, her Buddhist education was cut short. However, the Dharma always traveled, I would say, in our family, in that my mother was kind, compassionate, fair-minded. She had a lot of equanimity, and she was also a very strong woman. She would never have called herself a feminist. However, she was very gifted in science and in math. And so she became one of the first women pharmacists in the United States. So in a certain way, I became interested in the Buddhist path through poetry.
Mhm.
When I was reading that as an undergraduate at Oberlin College in Ohio, and thereafter through the work of beat poet Gary Snyder,
Mhm.
and then through translations of Chinese Tang Dynasty poets done by my poetry mentor, Professor David Young, who passed recently. So the Dharma entered my life through kind of underground streams and some overground streams, and then it all resulted in my turning towards the Buddhist path and taking Bodhisattva vows and precepts in Toronto with Korean Zen master Samu Sinim in 1983.
And it's sort of interesting. It's like your poetry was almost like a way to express the sensitivity of being a Buddhist in the world. You know, that kind of world that is and isn't, that what is it that the Japanese, the shadow world, they have a name for it, I can't recall right now. Um, Tell me a little bit about your life in Toronto when you took these radical vows, and I believe you had a son then already, right?
No,
No, okay. So you went from radical vows, then you got pregnant. Now that was really radical.
yes, because I had no money as a result of the radical renunciation vows. So then I was a poverty-stricken single Buddhist mother. What the heck? Uh, My original teacher was Korean Zen master Samu Sinim. He
Mm-hmm.
started his first temple in Toronto, in Canada, and then I was part of the founding of the first daughter temple in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So my
Mm-hmm.
training was divided between mostly in Ann Arbor, Michigan, since I'm a citizen of the United States. And occasionally I would take the train and go up to Toronto to work on Samu Sinim's Buddhist journal that he started, which was called Spring Wind. I'm a very good typist. I'm trained as a secretary. So I learned word processing on one of the first Apple computers, and that's how we produced that first issue of Wind, probably around 1984.
Mm-hmm. And when you came back to America at some point, you begin to do DEI work, which is probably what we call it now, but in some ways, those of us of a certain age, where, at least in my case, I'm extremely grateful that I hit the beginning of that wave because it allowed me to get educated, which would have been very difficult for a family like mine, also being immigrant, to be able to have the funds to allow me to get educated. So, what kind of work did you do within universities, corporations? How did you're a Buddhist, you have a background, you have poor, you have a child, but you decide to begin to work in this field. Will you tell us a little bit about what informed your work in that field?
Like so many things, it chose me, and I am a product of the civil rights movement in the United States, of the women's movement, of the gay liberation movement, of the Asian American liberation movement, of Black Power, of all of these radical movements for equity, for dignity, for for liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pretty much minding my own business and raising my kid here in Oakland, California, and lying pretty low. I was doing some practice, but I didn't really want to put my child into daycare. I wanted to raise him myself since he was my only one. And then I began to be freed up a little bit when he was getting ready to go into kindergarten. So around that time, which would be like 1999, 2000, I was very much involved with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. I wrote a column for them on Buddhist practice as family practice for 10 years. So that's 40 columns because we were a quarterly hard copy journal. And I was very involved with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. And so I was invited around, I don't know, 1999, 2000, I think, to be on a panel for Shakyadita, Daughters of the Buddha International Organization. And they were holding their yearly conference at the Pitzer College complex in Los Angeles, California, in the United States. And so they invited me and they said, oh, we want you to be on a panel of Asian American and Asian women Buddhists at this multi-day gathering conference for Shakyadita, Daughters of the Buddha. And I thought, well, okay, that's kind of weird. However, all right, I will. I just said, okay, I'll do it. And then it turned kind of fortunately, unfortunately, anyway, it turned into a bit of a drama because the person who had invited me, who was then the secretary of Shakyadita, and herself a university professor, an American citizen, highly educated, PhD, was was talking to me on the phone and saying, I was saying, well, why do we have to say Asian American Buddhist women and why do we have to have a special panel since Buddhism comes from Asia? Like just help me to understand this. And
Mm.
she said, oh, don't worry, don't worry. Calm down, calm down. We've got Asian American women Buddhists coming to this conference from all over. We have Asian American women Buddhists coming from Thailand and from Japan and from India. And I said, I'm so confused. You mean Asian American women who've traveled to those other countries? And someone's furrowing their brow here. And now they're coming back for this conference because they're working abroad. And there was a silence, and I realized she did not know that Asian Americans are American citizens. And this is how Asian Americans usually experience racism, as being regarded as perpetual foreigners, no matter how many generations our families have been born in the United States. Yes, when ICE sees us now, we shall be deported and snatched up. And it
Mhm.
was at that moment, it was a moment that radicalized me because, as I said, I'd been pretty quiet. I'd just been raising my kid and trying to be a good mother. And at that moment, I just thought, I've had enough. I don't want to have to prove my citizenship one more time. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. I've never been to Japan. My parents were born in the United States. I think the only time they'd ever been to Japan was when my father was drafted in World War II and into the US Army. You get the picture. And I decided I had had enough. And I began to take a stand politically to say Asian American Buddhists are American citizens. We are born in the United States. Our backgrounds may vary. Some of us come from Buddhist families, some of us do not. I mean, some of us do not. Mine was kind of mixed in that my grandparents in Hawaii were Buddhist, but my mother and father in Ohio did not espouse any particular religion.
Mhm.
And I wanted to be a voice to stand up and say, as has been written by Professor Funi Shu in Lion's Roar about Asian American Buddhists, we've always been here.
It's interesting because this reminds me the day that in Canada, which is where I live most of the time, the law was passed for gay marriage was the first time in my life I realized I had lived in apartheid and I didn't know it. It never occurred to me that I was not a citizen with full rights till that day. It was like, duh. Now,
Yes,
right?
precisely. And it's that kind of I don't know what we would call it, since it's always been that way. It's the water in which we swim as fish. And then to suddenly have that moment of saying, I'm not being treated as an equal, that
Mhm.
is an awakening moment.
Indeed, indeed. I would like to move on now to your work with the East Bay Meditation Center. One of the things I read was a little bit about the way you went about, and we talked about it in our pre-interview conversation, the way you went about deciding what the center was about. The notion of doing a gap analysis and realizing that you could have, as you called it, radical inclusivity, a collaboration of others. I love that, a collaboration of others. Can you describe how you went about discovering the need and coming up with programming and an identity that allowed you to really truly serve those others?
Yes, East Bay Meditation Center, which is located physically here in Oakland, California, in the United States, was on paper as a U.S. 501c3 religious nonprofit church for many years, for even like 8 years, incorporated under the name East Bay Dharma Center. And during that time, they were doing some fundraising. They didn't have a brick and mortar or a rental place. They were on paper trying to figure out who they were and what their mission and vision would be. And during that time, I was invited to be on the board of directors a couple of times. And I said, no, y'all don't even have a place to meet, and you do not have a mission and a vision to be something other than somewhere in the East Bay in California, in the Bay Area, which could be Oakland, Berkeley, El Cerrito, Alameda, Richmond. There are a bunch of different incorporated cities in what we call the East Bay region of California. So I said, no, I'm not going to work for free. Go away. And finally, they came to me a third time. And at that time, they were getting ready to rent a one-room storefront on Broadway in downtown Oakland that had two wheelchair accessible restrooms and a tiny office and was on public transit routes, so accessible to people who are low income, people with disabilities, and said, okay, how about now? And I said, now the conditions are met, and I will be happy to be on the board of directors of what we now call the East Bay Meditation Center. So we went from being the Dharma Center to Meditation Center, which, even though we are Buddhist based, we also include teachers who teach from indigenous and other wisdom traditions, primarily Buddhist and including indigenous and other wisdom traditions. So again, more inclusivity, more opportunity for learning
Mm-hmm.
across different spiritual cultures, and yet boundaried in a certain way so that we can go deeper within the container we created. We opened our doors to this one room rented storefront in downtown Oakland in January of 2007 in honor at the same time as Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday was being celebrated. That was not by mistake. And that was our statement that we conceived of ourselves as we refined it when we finally opened our doors, that our primary mission and vision is to extend a special welcome to people interested in the Dharma who are Black, Indigenous people of color, number one, multi-heritage or mixed race folks, members of the queer LGBTQI, two-spirit community, and also people with disabilities, chronic illness, and chronic pain. So of course we are open to all. Again, we're a church in the federal way of classifying, or nonprofits in the United States. And our mission is to especially serve those communities that included many people who are really interested in mindfulness, vipassana meditation, in Dharma, and who had gone to some of the many, many other Buddhist groups in the Bay Area and found, oh my gosh, I'm the only person of color here. Oh, I'm the only person in a wheelchair here. Or I tried to get in because I was in a wheelchair, but I couldn't even get in through the door because there was no wheelchair ramp. And so we were founded to include primarily address the needs of people who have been, as the term goes, othered.
Okay. So how how exactly do you run your programs in the center? Do people meet in different rooms? Do they meet together? Do they have separate classes? Are there specific teachers that teach in different communities? How do you work this giant beehive of opportunities?
Well, not too giant. and and we're now trying to emerge from the global COVID-19 pandemic, where of course everything had to go on Zoom. So we're in a recovery process. However, between 2007 and 2020, when we went into lockdown here in California for the global pandemic, so in those years, we developed a way of operating, which was that we have identity based practice groups
Mm.
and on different evenings. And so what we call our LGBTQI two-spirit group calls themselves the Alphabet Sangha
Mm.
because new letters are being added on all the time. And so they didn't want to have to change their name of the practice group. So they're the Alphabet Sangha. These days they meet every Tuesday evening. The people of color, now called the BIPOC EBMC Sangha, meets every Thursday evening. They're the group for people with disabilities, chronic illness, chronic pain meets Sunday evenings. That's Everybody, Every Mind Sangha. And then there's a group that's open to all, social justice centered, called the Mahasangha Practice Group, and that meets on
Mm.
Fridays. So that leaves Mondays and Wednesdays open for general classes and programming, as well as Saturdays and Sundays during the days for half day or full day retreats and other kinds of programs. And that's the way that we've been able to accommodate different needs of different parts of our Sangha, as well as provide an overall umbrella container that encourages communication across these different identity-based groups.
One of the things that you mentioned in our earlier conversation, you said the platinum rule for diversity is to have people in positions of leadership that look like the people you want to present the Dharma to, in terms of identity, whatever their identity is. So the part of the conundrum is a timing conundrum because it takes time to train teachers. You actually have to walk the path, and that is not instant. At the same time, the need is now. How have you worked with that?
That's a really good question, and I'll just back up a little bit and say the platinum rule, as I've learned it in diversity, equity, inclusion work, is actually to recognize the golden rule. What's usually called the golden rule is to treat others as you yourself wish to be treated. However, others may not be like us. So we can notch it up to the platinum rule, which is to treat others as they wish to be treated. As they
Mm.
wish to be treated. For instance, as an Asian American, as someone trained in Korean Zen, it's not usually considered connective to look someone right in the eyes. Depending on their age, their status, it could be very, very rude. So usually you kind of look down a little bit. And however, there might be situations in which your peers are of equal age or equal status, and you might look into the other person's eyes. That would be only one tiny detail on treating others as they wish to be treated, how so that they can feel seen, heard, recognized, and be treated with dignity. What you're talking about is also very important, and that is as a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant operating mainly in Buddhist and educational groups, as well as some nonprofits who are incorporating mindfulness into their work, such as I had one client who run a women's shelter in New York City for women who have been experiencing or are experiencing domestic violence. And the counselors working with these women, and mostly women with children, and mostly disabled women with children, wanted to get some advice from me, some consultation with me on disability access informed mindfulness meditation instructions. And so this is something that's been developed through East Bay Meditation Center, and how we're how we're training and raising kind of our next generation of Buddhist teachers has been in a number of ways. Number one, I would say we recognize that real life experience combined with some level of Dharma practice and meditation practice, that is going to be so valuable. And it by doing leadership development among the leaders, because we attract so many justice activists and they're executive directors and public speakers. I mean, they are not shy, underdeveloped people. And to invite them in to say, what has your Dharma experience been? San Francisco Zen Center has a custom of inviting peer Dharma talks that are called, I forget, something about the way, sharing the way, something like that talks, in which you say, this is how the Dharma has manifested for me in my experience, my lived experience. And I would say that that is the doorway through which we've invited people to come forward in leadership. And then also, we've, of course, encouraged them to, we created a culture of encouraging people to go on retreat, to make time, to go deeper in their practice, to go deeper in their study. And different people are in different situations. So some people have more time than others. However, we're almost 20 years old, and people, they naturally will go deeper. They will if they're surrounded and given that support. We've also had several year-long and now half-year and some 2-year training programs that have encouraged people to develop qualities of spiritual leadership and Dharma leadership that are informed by justice principles as well as the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's how we've developed East Bay Meditation Center.
You know, it makes me think of really truly applying Zen mind, beginner's mind. All your beginners are Buddha. And if you can see them as such, you can bring them along no matter who they are.
I certainly hope so. As you know, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who is the founder of San Francisco Zen Center, very famously said and has been quoted, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few.
Yes, yes. And, you know, to follow you were talking about opportunities. I think that one of the things that remains to be understood is in traditional Asian communities, the lay community is very generous, right? And we're having in America what I've always seen to be a class problem. It's a class problem. We don't understand that some people just don't have the time and the means. If you're your typical working class person earning minimum wage, if you're trying to keep a family together, you're probably working 2 jobs. You don't have time, you don't have money. And somehow or other, when we tend to take care, work with donors, we, of course, are trying to make sure our centers and so on stay alive. But we need to find ways to go bigger, to find ways where no matter who you are, especially if you're poor, like most of the communities that you serve, you don't have to invent stuff. You can figure it out. You can get there. Please.
Yeah, definitely, I agree with that. And once again, if we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, equity also indicates socioeconomic and class equity so that we can provide access not only to basic services that people need, also including opportunities for spiritual practice and going deeper in whatever our path may be.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you one more question and then I'm going to open it to questions because there's some very interesting people in the audience. And I would love for them to have an opportunity to interact with you. How is the current zeitgeist of ICE, of Christian nationalists, of intolerance specifically affected your Dharma community? For example, in many of the communities that I'm familiar with, us white boomers, so to speak, are scratching our heads about what to do about to help others. But what about if the other is you and you feel you can get arrested? I mean, some of the people in Chicago here, for example, um, Iranian students were terrified that they were, it's not just that you're an illegal immigrant, but that they might get rid of you because they don't like your status. Um, how has your community maintained its sanity in the last few months?
Today is in April of 2026, to put a timestamp on what will be this recording. And I would say that my community at East Bay Meditation Center is, of course, struggling. We're struggling economically. We're struggling in terms of physical and mental health. And that having been said, I do a fair amount of multi-faith work, so I hope that I'm not offending anyone at this point. I am Buddhist, so I'll just say the Dharma for me, taking refuge in the Dharma, in the Buddha Dharma, the teachings of Buddhism, it provides the refuge, it provides the foundation for physical, mental, and spiritual wellness and wholeness that is needed during these times of multiple stressors. I myself was extremely impacted by the anti-Asian violence during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I was Zooming with my therapist, had to go onto Zoom with her, and she is white. And I was saying, I'm losing mobility because I'm not leaving this apartment. I'm afraid to go out and even walk around the block because Asian Americans are being thrown onto subway tracks and killed and assaulted with knives and so forth while waiting for people, the buses at the bus stops. That kind of thing was happening. I think there was a woman in New York in the early part of the pandemic. She was Asian descent, and she was just minding her own business, waiting at a bus stop, and two people came up and set her on fire. So I was saying to my therapist, I'm afraid to go out. And she said, well, you have to go out. It would be good for your health. Maybe just go out and walk around the block. And I think you'd probably be safe enough. And I said, I just read last week that there was a Asian looking woman my age who was thrown down on the subway tracks in, I don't know, maybe it was even San Francisco, but run over with an oncoming subway train. And my therapist said, stay inside.
Inside.
And I live with my adult son, and he's always been very easygoing about, we come and go. We're free people. We're adults. He's a middle-aged guy. However, after that started, the way we were affected is that even if I went out to mail a letter at the corner office postal box, he said, you always have to take your phone and it always has to be on, and we have to always be able to be in contact with one another at every moment. So this is a personal story, and I can share it with you because it's my story. Now we're going to multiply that across the many identity categories of people that comprise my spiritual community who are targeted for oppression and for violence, for disrespect, for for being killed in hate crimes across these different identity categories, and we can begin to feel the weight of the impact on our communities, as well as it is multi-dimensional, and it does result in trauma, which, as we know, can then kind of embed itself in us and proceed for generations.
Before I pass you on to the questions, I can't help myself, but could you tell the story about your 4-year-old son and the question he asked you about the flowers being trampled?
Yes. So I've tried not to be proselytizing, but too bad.
Go for it.
My only child was raised in a Buddhist household, and he was babysat by Robert Aitken Roshi, and he's known all these monks and nuns. We lived for a year at Green Gulch Zen Center in Marin County when he was between 1 and 2. Then we moved here to Oakland, and it was one summer when he was in an an art class in Berkeley. And so I drove down there and I parked the car on the street, and we walked hand in hand to where the art class was, and we noticed there were these beautiful flowers that someone or a shopkeeper had planted in one of those squares in the sidewalk. There was a tree, and then and they were just gorgeous. They had just bloomed. They were brightly colored, and we just exclaimed, "Oh, how pretty they are!" And so I dropped him off, and then I came back a couple of hours later, and I parked right in that same area, and I went to get him from his class. And so we were walking back again, hand in hand, to where the car was parked, and we saw a group of teenage boys roughhousing and just pushing each other around and being very. They weren't being hostile to one another. They were just
Boys.
horsing around, yes. And they came and passed us, and then when we passed where the flowers were, they had trampled on the flowers and broken them all, and they were all broken and beginning to die. And my son, who was 4, was really angry, and he yelled at me. He was angry at me, and he said, "Mom, how could this have happened? You told me everybody has a Buddha inside themselves." That was how I explained the concept of Buddha nature to a preschooler. He said, you told me everyone, how could they do that? How could they do that? And I stayed quiet. And then we got into the car, and I was driving, and he was in a funk in the back seat, strapped into his car seat, looking very, very angry. And I thought, well, hey, I'm driving, deal with it. And after a while, as we neared getting home, he said in a thoughtful voice, he said, "I think those people were not aware of the Buddha inside themselves."
Thank you. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please, this is your opportunity to ask Mushim all kinds of questions or share some of your concerns, some of your stories. And by the way, at the end, Mushim, don't let me forget to make sure that people can reach you somehow, to find a way to reach you. So questions, comments, please. I know some of the people here, and I know you're smart, and I know you're dealing with all this stuff, so please go for it.
Thank you. And also, you had suggested earlier I might read a Buddhist poem, and I'm prepared to do that as
Oh,
well.
okay, good. Good. Well, have it ready just in case these people who are not shy. Oh, good. Hello, Alice. Please come along.
Well, I will if Mushim Patricia is not going to read the poem now. I had a question. You described all the different identity groups that meet at the center, and then you said we provide an overall umbrella for these groups. And I wanted to hear more about that. What is the umbrella? What is it, what does it look like? Is it the board of directors? Is it, what is there, how does that work, that there's an umbrella that helps them communicate across and all like that?
That's a very good question. And I'll add on to that that before the pandemic, and we're now trying to make our way back, we also had we had groups for teenagers, and we had a group for families with young children.
Mhm.
I was one of the rotating teachers for that since I have a lot of experience with peppy little kids who are running around and screaming. And I would also always team up with my martial arts master friend, brother, on that one because he's an expert with children and has some himself as well. So we were very good with the children. To answer your question, East Bay Meditation Center is the umbrella 501c3 for these diverse groups because our mission is one of diversity and inclusion. So we recognize that people who identify in different ways may feel most comfortable practicing and doing Dharma discussion or discussion with people who share characteristics of that identity group. I mean, for instance, Asian Americans, that's such that, I mean, in a certain way, no one even knows what it is because what we call Asia can be interpreted in so many different ways. However, in terms of the United States, which was formed on the basis of genocide and racism and slavery, yeah, it is a meaningful category. And so we might say that we're an umbrella group in terms of the very common concept out of which is out of many come one. That we recognize the need for, I mean, people with screaming children are probably going to have different needs than people who don't want to hear screaming children and who need to have a lot of quiet. And people who have the screaming children may need to have people babysit so then they can go off and have quiet in another room. And by all being together under the umbrella of East Bay Meditation Center, people do form relationships across the different groups. Before the pandemic, through physical proximity, you'd see one group coming out as your group was coming in. We'd see it on our websites, we'd see it on our newsletter, and we would begin uh, to develop a sense of what was happening in these various groups. Sometimes the Dharma talks would be recorded, or you'd go into the center and you'd see artwork that the children had done. You get the idea. There would be ways of both physically and online recognizing to one another and saying, "Hi, we're here."
Mhm.
And diversity enriches us all.
Yes. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
Alice is here in Chicago with me, and she also works with Brenda, who is in the board of directors of the Buddhist Coalition for Democracy and fellow Shambhalian. Brenda, please.
Yes, thank you, Mushim, for your presentation. I have a question. I've been facilitating a BIPOC group since 2015. We started out Atlanta only, and after the pandemic, I went Zoom. And so now I have people all over the country. What my intention is to encourage people to um, commit to the Shambhala teaching without forcing. I'm not trying to force it on them. Do you have any words? They're meditating. They have a regular practice, but they're just not wanting to commit to any particular organization. Do you have any suggestions as to should I leave it alone, just let people be as they are, or can, can should I encourage them to become a part of Shambhala?
That's a really good question. And the way that we have approached it through East Bay Meditation Center and also through my previous training at the Zen Buddhist temples of Ann Arbor and in Toronto and other Buddhist groups that I've been part of is through encouraging people to get involved as volunteers. Because then they feel more stake in
Exactly.
the organization, and yet at the same time, they have a defined job that doesn't mean in their minds that they're signing some contract of which I shall be your servant forever. But what if this is a cult kind of fear, which is not unjustified? And so inviting people in to do something that is boundaried at the same time is an expression of dana, of the Buddhist generous giving. And, you know, all of the heritage temples, so-called heritage temples in the United States, they have huge numbers of volunteers who are always coming to do gardening, to wamp up food, to do cleaning. My cousin, Reverend Mary Jiko Nakade, is priest of Daifukuji Soto Zen Mission Temple on the Big Island of Hawaii.
Mhm.
They have one morning a week where they invite temple members to come and clean the temple. And most of the people who turn up are in their 80s. And they're moving giant like tables around and mopping floors. And my cousin and I agreed, you know, they're the older generation. We can't stand up to them. Geez, they're so energetic and they're joyful. And then they have snacks with the priest afterward. So that um, kind of lower stakes
Mhm.
invitation in
Mhm.
helps to ease the path. And then people sometimes become super volunteers,
Yeah.
Brenda, and they'll say, I'm ready to take responsibility for like developing a whole infrastructure for something or other, or I'm an accountant and I'm going to offer you free, yay, accounting services. There, so to have that volunteer path that is very diverse at different levels of involvement is a way for people to develop confidence, to develop relationships, to develop a sense of leadership, and to develop a sense of loyalty to the organization.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, I've got that it worked in Atlanta. I've got a couple of people who have gone through the whole train Shambhala training. One just started. He's been with me since 2015, and he just started with level one now. So I'm really happy about that. But then I have people all over in Canada and different parts of the country where there are Shambhala centers, but they're not going for various reasons. One is that they don't see people, they've been there and they don't see people like themselves. They didn't feel welcome, various reasons. So, but I wanted them to go beyond that.
hmm Well,
Yeah.
there can be things like book clubs, small groups that can be on Zoom for people who are in different regions. So they might be close enough to get together too as they get to know one another and have coffee. And even if they're not, then they can develop relationships that, due to karma, Brenda, have unexpected consequences. I teach a class series in the fall through East Bay Meditation Center called Path of the Bodhisattva. And we had small groups that were organized by a volunteer on Zoom. And one of those small groups were like, we really like each other. And so we're going to meet once a month after this program ends on our own recognizance and study the Heart Sutra together, peer led. And so one of the members of that group, Brenda, had gone on a long solo backpacking trip and then was at a train station in Los Angeles, California, waiting to take a train back home and saw a person walking across this vast train station. And it was a member of their Heart Sutra study group that they had only ever seen on Zoom, and recognized this person and called out their name and said, "Hi, so and so, is this you?" And it was that exact moment. You can think of that's only a matter of seconds for that person to walk past and for this person not to be looking at their phone and to recognize a person and then to have the courage to call out their name. So all of these kinds of interconnections through book clubs, through sutra study, through nature walks, whatever is the common interest that will bring people together. Food is very good. That will bring people together. It, in my point of view as a Buddhist, it creates those seeds of connection and karma, which can manifest almost immediately, or maybe not in our lifetimes, however, that have very beneficial, deep consequences.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I see one more hand up, and I don't know if we'll have time for a poem. However, I
Yes,
want to.
yes, we will. We will have time for a
Okay.
poem because I'm going to give you the last word. But after Harry asks this question, I have just a little bit more. So, Harry, please.
Let me unmute myself. Aloha, Patricia. Hey, Seth. Aloha. I'm sitting here in Kohala on the side of the road. I'm friends with Jiko. And I've sat with Aiken Roshi in Honolulu back in the 70s, and I know Green Gulch. That was my main Dharma connection through Green Gulch. So I want to relate to you a quick thumbnail story of a teaching I received in a living room. Carl and Elaine Yoneda. He was Japanese. He ran away from Japan and the draft, so he didn't have to fight in China. He married a Russian Jew called Elaine. The FBI shows up at their door. They have a 3-year-old, Tommy Yoneda, mixed Tommy. FBI says, "We're taking you to Manzanar. You don't have to go, lady." Elaine says, "Oh no, I go with my family." She was one of the few European women in Manzanar in the camp. Her husband, Tom, or rather Carl, he goes off and serves Marine intelligence as a translator in the Pacific Theater. One of the few. Elaine's hair turned white, this Russian Jew. Elaine's hair turned white, protecting little Tommy from the resentful internees she was sharing internment with. It was a real teaching in the universality of animus, of our lower nature. And it has stuck with me ever since, that the work is on ourselves. And I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you so much. What a precious treasure story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brett. We're close to the end, and I will give Patricia the very last word so we can stay with the spirit of her poetry. But let me just say, one of the things that I was impressed by the article that you wrote in Lion's Roar is that you actually ended this way. We're all going to need to be braver than some of us have been prepared to be, but brave in a sustainable way, remaining with our children, our families, and our communities. We need to build this new way of living together, how it functions, handles conflicts, makes decisions, eats and loves, grieves and plays. And we can't do that by burning out. So may we all do that. And before I pass the word to Patricia, I just want to invite all of you to join us on April 23rd at the same time, in the same place. We will send a Zoom. So please, if you're interested in following the New Horizons in Engaged Buddhism, simply write to me, New Horizons in Engaged Buddhism @gmail.com. And I will send you a list of the podcasts and telecasts that are coming, and I will let you know via email what the Zoom will be for that session. So, and it's interesting because what Tara White is going to be, Tara Brach is going to be talking about is not so much how not to burn out, but the other side of the equation, which is what is stopping us? What would propel us to be more engaged? So it's like the beginning of the question. Having said that, Mushim, please share with us um, your, is it dream world? I'll have to think. It has to do with haiku. It has a certain term, which I can't recall. But anyhow, it doesn't matter. Please grace us with your poetry.
Thank you. So this comes from a set of poems published in this book, which is called Cascadian Zen, like the Cascadian Mountains, Cascadian Zen, Bioregional Writings on Cascadia Here and Now, Volume 1, by a collective in Cascadia. And I was kind of included, I think, I'm here in Oakland. I was asked to submit poetry during the pandemic years by an Asian American editor that they had at the time. And I said, oh, thank you so much. But, you know, I'm not in your watershed. I'm in Oakland. And the editor said, we'll count you in. So that was really nice. I was welcomed in to be an honorary Cascadian watershed member here in Northern California where I live, but a little farther down from the Cascades. And I've been working very slowly on a series of poems called the Heart Sutra Fragment Poems, taking in fragments from the Heart Sutra and through my lived experience as a practitioner. And I hope to finish maybe 12 of them and have them published as a set at some time. That's my goal. But 3 of them are published in Cascadian Zen Volume 1. So this is one of them. It's Heart Sutra Fragment 7. And it begins with an epigraph of a translation into English from one of my favorite poets, Italian poet Eugenio Montale, The Prisoner's Dream. And that line translated into English is, my dream of you is not yet over. All dharmas are marked with boundlessness. Do not appear or disappear. Do not increase or decrease. At the funeral in the jazz nightclub in Oakland for a civil rights attorney, I recited the Diamond Sutra's last verse. Tonight, from memory, I hear, like a flash of lightning in a summer storm, foam on a wave, a dewdrop or a dream, so should we look on all conditioned things. It says we should, but I am as yet unable. So today, in the lines on the ground that is always burning, this prayer, Creator of my life, grant me freedom from greed. Give me eyes to see the radiant mountain, the compassionate sea, have not been dreamed by me alone.
Patricia, before I ask you to dedicate the merit in whichever way you do, can you tell people how to reach you? How can they find you? I know people are going to want more.
Yes, I have a website with a contact feature, www.mushimikeda.com, www.mushimikeda.com. S as in Sam, H as in Harriet, IMIKEDA.com.
So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And more thank yous. That's
Thank you.
one for all the
Welcome.
various communities, you see? So would you like to lead us in dedicating the merit?
Yes, this is thank you in American Sign Language. And my favorite dedication of merit comes from the dedication of merit chapter in the Bodhicharya the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by the great teacher Shantideva. Thus, by the virtue that has collected from all that we have done, may the pain of every living being be completely cleared away.
Thank you, and see you all in our next podcast.